Hello, guys and gals, and welcome back to the reading of The Little Giant Book of Whodunits by Conrad, and illustrated by LaFleur. And as we saw in the last episode, LaFleur actually made an appearance in one of these stories, which I think is pretty cool, that the illustrator ended up in one of the stories. I'm not sure if Conrad did or not, but I know that it had LaFleur as the last name, George LaFleur. Anyways, this is part 9, by the way. We're going to put this to the side now. And in the last one, it was about the clock shop, and that was really kind of cool. We are going to get right into this, and we are going to start off with the Pretender's Ball Part 4. Now, I think this is the last one, and I think they finally gave up because people kept dying, and things kept getting destroyed by fire, you know. Kill it with fire. Anyways. There's one more episode after this, meaning that there are approximately 16 stories left, and we're getting there. So this is the Pretender's Ball Part 4. For 3 years running, the rebels have struck during the Grand Duchy's annual costume ball, yet even after 2 assassinations and a disastrous fire, the Prime Minister felt obliged not to cancel. The event was held at the old venue, the Ducal Palace. And in honor of the past tragedies, the theme was black, where every costume required to have at least an accent of black. The guests arrived and submitted themselves to the usual useless search. The Arabian sheik gave up his scimitar, and the peasant relinquished his pitchfork at the door. Dracula was allowed to keep his pointy teeth, while the gypsy got to carry her tambourine, as long as she didn't play it. The Prime Minister, Egyptian Pharaoh, put on a brave front as he knew it was just a matter of time. At a few minutes past midnight, he strolled into the blue room. The first thing he noticed was a drapery tie missing from one of the curtains. He was about to ring for a servant when he stumbled over the body of a black chess king, also known as General Fortescue, stabbed with a sword taken from the royal coat of arms above the fireplace. There was something in the general's hand. The Prime Minister tried to remove it, but it was clutched tight. A piece of black fabric, 2 inches wide and about 18 inches long, stained red with the general's blood. The assassination took no one by surprise, and they all lined up for the usual post-crime inspection. No one seemed to be missing any part of their costume. It says, "No one seems to be missing any part of their costume," said the sheik, Colonel Azbek, as he scratched the blue band around his Arabian headgear. Well, that swatch must have come from somewhere," said the gypsy, royal hairdresser, adjusting the black sash around her ample midriff. Everyone was looking to the Prime Minister to solve the crime, just like the others, but it was the peasant, new chief of police, who quickly pointed out the assassin. Who done it, and how did the chief know? Solution is on page 333. Let me stick this in here. Okay. I'm going to turn that around. 333. Let's check this out. As he was being stabbed, the general reached out to his killer, grabbing part of the assailant's costume and tearing it off. After the murder, the killer couldn't take back his black costume piece. It was stained with blood, so he improvised, replacing it with a drapery tie from the curtain in the blue room. Okay. The chief of police saw that the only costume guest wearing a piece of blue fabric was the Arabian sheik. So it was General Azbek. Okay, we are ready for Driven to Suicide. Star cars had seemed like a good idea. Bo and Irving Pimpleton would translate their passions into a business. The brothers would rent out vintage automobiles to Los Angeles film companies and production houses for background and atmosphere. Bo took care of the contracts and customers, while Irving kept the cars in pristine shape, refusing to even drive them on the street. But the Plimpton boys hadn't had a rental in weeks and were facing bankruptcy. One afternoon, an attendant spotted Bo's sports car driving driving into the basement garage at Beau's apartment building. An hour later, Beau's live-in girlfriend drove in and found his car occupying her spot. Peering through the dark tinted glass, Pauline could see her fiance's hulking silhouette squeezed inside. She opened the driver's door, then strapped into his safety belt was the body of Beau Plimpton. He'd been shot once in the left temple. The revolver still in his left hand, an apparent suicide. Miss Pauline's spot is behind a pillar, so I didn't see anything, the attendant testified. Didn't hear a shot either, and I was in the garage all day. Of course, if his widows ever rolled up, that might account for it. Those tiny German sports cars are well insulated. When the police visited the Star Cars garage, they found Irving patching a small dent in the side of their prized 47 DeSoto. "What can I do for you?" he asked the officers. At first, Irving didn't seem to understand. Suicide? No, Beau would never kill himself. It must be Pauline, a gold digger if there ever was one. I didn't know how much he's lent her. I finally talked him into trying to get the money back, and now suddenly he's dead. Pauline was more willing to accept suicide. Yes, Beau was left-handed, and he had been depressed a lot lately. Do you have any reason to suspect foul play? The detective nodded. Given the circumstances, suicide was virtually impossible, and we have a good idea who it was. What fact eliminates suicide? Whom do they suspect and why? Let's see. Okay, so we need to go to page 313, but first of all, we are going to stick a bookmark in here and go to page 313. Okay, here we are. It would have been impossible for a large man in a small car to shoot himself in the left temple, not with the safety belt on and the window rolled up. There wouldn't be enough elbow room. Beau must have been murdered elsewhere, then driven to the apartment building garage. Irving always kept the vintage cars in mint condition, but when the police came, he was fixing a dent, even though the car hadn't been driven in weeks. The police noticed this and theorized the car had been dented during a fatal fight in which Irving killed his brother. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, here we are. Even hypochondriacs die. The trouble with hypochondriacs is you never know when they're sick. Such were the thoughts running through Ethel Evans' mind as she dialed the two cellular numbers, one for Dr. Mills and the other for her brother Bertie. "Come immediately," she told both of them. "Daddy just took a turn for the worse." The hypochondriac in question, J.P. Evans, began the morning feeling well. Dr. Mills had been there for his daily examination, leaving the usual row of pills at JV's bedside. Bertie fed his father breakfast, then left for his regular day at the horse track. At 11 a.m., Ethel fed JP the first batch of pills. It was shortly after that when he began gasping for air, and Ethel made her call. Ethel hung up and listened to the wail of a freighter as it chugged by. That was the problem with living on a residential island, even though they were connected to the rest of the city by a bridge, maybe? Oh, drawbridge. There were times when she felt so isolated. Dr. Mills arrived in 10 minutes. I was making my rounds at the city hospital when he called. I broke every speed limit. How is he? Doing better, Ethel replied, but her diagnosis proved inaccurate. Despite Dr. Mills' best effort, J.P. Evans died a short while later, just as his only son was driving up. As usual, Bertie had an excuse for being late. I was on my way here when you called. I had a premonition he might get worse. I was just approaching the drawbridge, and then the dang thing went up for a freighter. I had to wait here forever. There was no up drawbridge to stop the police from arriving, and there was nothing stopping the medical examiner from coming back with a finding of death by poison. We don't know how it was administered, a homicide sergeant complained, and without knowing that, we can't know who killed him. His partner loved to contradict. Well, I know who killed him, he said, and that tells me how the poison was administered. Who done it, and what made the detective suspicious? Okay, we need page 314, but first of all, we're going to... here it is. Okay, we'll put the bookmark in and go to page 314. 314. Right after making the phone call, Ethel heard a freighter chug by the island. That was confirmed by Bertie, who was delayed by the raised drawbridge. And yet Dr. Mills seemed to have no problem with the drawbridge. Why? Because he was already on the island, not at the city hospital. It was Dr. Mills who poisoned the pills. Knowing approximately when the symptoms would take effect, the doctor made sure he was still nearby. He wanted to be the first on the scene just in case something went wrong. When it looked like JP might recover from the poison, Dr. Mills administered an extra dose. Okay, so it was the doctor. That's a scary thought. Okay, page 250. The Penguin House Murder. Okay. At 10 a.m. exactly, the gates to the zoo were flung open. A handful of early visitors headed directly for the Penguin House. The kids raced in to get the best view of the glass-enclosed habitat and nearly stumbled over the corpse. It was Cheryl Hammaker, a zoo employee dressed for work and wearing a plastic feeding apron. She'd been strangled. The medical examiner took the body's temperature, leading him to estimate that she'd been dead for well over 12 hours. Makes sense, the zoo director said. The penguins are fed 3 times a day. When the handlers get here at 8, then at noon, and finally around 6 right after we close. He checked the victim's feeding apron, still filled with small fish. That's probably when it happened. A detective agreed as he sniffed, smelling just the faintest fishy odor, right before last night's feeding. Cheryl had been a conscientious worker, arriving early and leaving late. She lived close to the zoo and kept to herself. I just promoted her to department head, the director said, with her own set of keys. 2 other people were up for the job. They got pretty upset. One of the rejected employees was Sean. Jacksepticeye worked at the Penguin House? Oh. With Sean, one of the employees was Sean. I took yesterday off, Sean testified. My church held an all-day retreat, and we didn't get home until midnight. I went right to bed. I had to be here at work by 8. Juan, the other suspect, was found in the penguin food freezer, taking inventory of fish deliveries. When I left last night, Cheryl was just filling up her apron for last night's feeding. She told me I could go home. This morning, Bert and I drove in together, and I went right to work in Reptile World until we heard the news. Horrible. The medical examiner walked past the body again, sniffing the air, then turned to the detective. There's something odd here, he said. We need to question one of our suspects more thoroughly. Who done it, and what led the medical examiner to his suspicion? Let's see. So the solution is on page 329. We're going to put a little bookmark in here and go to page 329. The Penguin House murder. If Cheryl's body had been lying around for 12 or so hours, the fish in her apron would have probably stunk. Given off much more than just a faint fishy odor. They would have stunk. The medical examiner deduced that someone cooled the body artificially, trying to confuse him about the time of death. Cheryl must have been killed much later, perhaps just an hour or 2 ago. The killer then placed the body in the penguin food freezer until shortly before the zoo opened. The police should concentrate on the suspect who had the ironclad alibi last night, but no alibi this morning. Sean. Oh. Okay, then. Okay, and next we have the Flat Motorist, I think. I'm going to take the bookmark out. The Flat Motorist. Oh, boy. All right, Mr. Darden, the automotive club operator read back the information. Your car has a flat. You have a spare, but it's in your trunk, and your trunk lock is broken. You're pulled over on Route 5. I'll have a tow truck out to you immediately. Alex Darden flapped shut his cellular phone and shivered in the night air. Maybe he'd gotten lucky. Maybe someone would come along, or maybe he'd get lucky. Maybe someone would come along before the tow truck arrived. The tow truck driver found the car easily enough. He saw the flat tire still on the wheel and the jack on the ground beside it. Next, he saw the blood on the jack and finally the body. Alex Darden, middle-aged businessman, had been robbed and bludgeoned to death. As luck would have it, the Highway Patrol had been conducting a sobriety check half a mile west of the murder scene. One of the officers had taken a break. Let me see here. 55, 56, okay. Down license numbers, and before long, the police were focused on 3 motorists who had passed by before the tow truck's arrival. Arnold Aspick's motorcycle had been stopped first. I saw a car off the side of the road, he told them. The next day, I stopped to see if the driver needed help. He needed a spare tire, and, of course, I didn't have one. I should have mentioned it to you guys at the checkpoint, but I forgot. Nan Bigelow was next. The female trucker had driven her 18-wheeler right past the stranded car. I was glancing at a map, she admitted. I'm sure I would have noticed someone on the roadside waving for help, but I didn't see a thing. Tom Endry's brand new convertible was the last vehicle to pass by before the tow truck arrived. I saw the car, Tom testified. As I drove past, I looked around for the driver, but I didn't see him. The investigating officer reviewed the notes. I think I know who did it, and there's an easy way to check it out. Who done it, and how can the officer check his theory? Okay, the solution is on page 315. We're going to put a little bookmark in here, and we're going to go to page 315. The murder weapon, a jack, could not have come from the victim's car since his trunk lock was broken. It was most likely the property of the killer who pretended to be coming to the aid of the stranded motorist before crushing in his head with the tool. An 18-wheeler and a motorcycle would not be equipped with car jacks, but a brand new convertible would. The police checked the trunk of Tom Endry's car. They found the standard spare tire, but no jack. It didn't take long for the police to confirm that the murder weapon had come from Endry's trunk. So I guess that Tom Endry caused some injury. Okay, The Clumsy Thief. Okay, The Clumsy Thief. Charlene Tyner was half awake when she heard it. Coming from downstairs, the sound of spilling coins. She checked the time, 2 a.m., then rolled over and went back to sleep. In the morning, when Charlene walked into her kitchen, she immediately noticed the theft. The jar in which she kept her collection of silver dollars was completely empty. That's when she recalled the late-night sound, and that's when she saw the refrigerator. It was askew, the only thing out of center in the perfectly maintained... saw the refrigerator was askew, the only thing out of center in the perfectly maintained kitchen. Charlene knelt down and reached into the narrow space between the refrigerator and the cabinet. At least they didn't get them all, she thought, as she pulled her arm out. 2 silver dollars, all that was left of her prized collection. The irate housewife quickly raised the alarm. Myrna, her sullen daughter, was the first one down. A would-be model, Myrna had already what? Been in the modeling business, maybe? Had already worked in a few fashion shows. Most of the time, she spent hanging out with her no-good boyfriend. Her room was at the top of the stairs, and she slept with the door open. Someone walked by in the dark, she volunteered. I heard the coins spilling, too. I thought it was just an accident. Forrest Tyner emerged from the downstairs bathroom, a gangly, gaunt man. He had never been Charlene's dream husband, but he was a good father. It was only after the wedding that she discovered his habit of spending half his paycheck at the local tavern. I came in late, he admitted, alcohol still on his breath. I didn't want to disturb you, so I slept on the couch. I didn't wake up until a few minutes ago. Jesse, Charlene's son, lumbered down last, obese and lazy. Jesse's twin passions were food and video games. I came downstairs for a snack after midnight. I could hear Myrna snoring. Dad wasn't on the couch. I went back to bed and didn't hear anything. Charlene looked around the kitchen, and her heart sank. She had just figured out who had taken her coins, who done it, and how did Charlene know. Solution is on page 308, and we are going to put a bookmark in here. 308. Here we are. The Clumsy Thief. The askew refrigerator was the pivotal clue. It showed that the thief had reached into the narrow space in order to retrieve the spilled coins. The fact that the thief didn't reach back far enough to find the last two coins pointed Charlene to an inevitable conclusion. The thief's arms were thicker than her own. Daughter Myrna was a thin model, husband Forrest was gangly and gaunt, but Jesse was obese. Only he would have been unable to reach the last two coins. Okay. We are to Welcome Back Cutter, it looks like. That should be this one. Welcome Back Cutter. And we are almost done here. The homicide sergeant glanced down... excuse me. Welcome Back Cutter. The homicide sergeant glanced around the bedroom. It was a far cry from the obsessive neatness of the rest of the house. There were broken fixtures, scattered furniture, and a crunchy coating of shattered picture glass covering the carpet. Quite a fight, he muttered. On the bed lay the body of Reese Cutter, a sales rep. Just returned from a business trip. He'd been stabbed through with an ornamental sword torn from the bedroom wall. The victim's brother was contacted at work halfway across town. Earlier in the day, Broderick Cutter had picked Reese up at the airport. That's a tongue twister. As soon as we got in, Reese went up to his bedroom and unpacked everything. We talked. Then I had to get to work. My shift starts at 7. Reese's wife was coming over later. Marjorie wanted Reese to sign divorce papers, but he kept refusing. I guess she doesn't have to worry about that now. Okay. Let's see. Marjorie Cutter confirmed the appointment. I got there around 7:30 p.m., the sergeant noted that this was a full hour after Broderick had left. I knocked and knocked, but Reese didn't answer. I figured he was just being childish, trying to avoid me. The last person to actually speak to the victim was the manager at Parcheesi Pizza. Around 7, Mr. Cutter called in an order, his usual ham and pineapple. He sounded nervous, not quite himself. Billy delivered it. Billy's not in any trouble, is he? It was Billy who discovered the body. The front door was unlocked. The antagonistic pizza driver testified. I wasn't about to be stood up, especially not for ham and pineapple. Yuck. So I went inside. At first I didn't think anyone was around. Then I saw the bedroom. The sergeant finished examining the crime scene. He opened the closet, saw the neatly hung suits and shirts, then removed the suitcase from a shelf. It was empty and immaculate except for a tiny shard of glass caught in the side pouch. I think we have our killer. Whom does the sergeant suspect and why? The solution is on page 347. Let's put this in here. 347? I think that's probably the very last one. Welcome back, Cutter. The glass shard reminded the sergeant of the shattered picture glass in the victim's bedroom. The suitcase must have been lying open during the deadly fight. This made him suspect Broderick, who testified that Reese had finished unpacking while they were together. Broderick eventually confessed. That evening, he told Reese the reason Marjorie wanted a divorce. She and Broderick were in love. The brothers fought, and Reese wound up getting the long end of the sword. In order to give himself an alibi, Broderick finished unpacking Reese's suitcase. A half hour later, when he arrived at work, he telephoned Parcheesi Pizza pretending to be his brother. Okay. And the last one is... I can't read my handwriting, so we're going to... the Videotaped Suspect. At first, it seemed like death from natural causes. Marcus Tomby, an investigative reporter, was found slumped over his desk at the Times, victim of a heart attack, and then the security detector from the Fordham Arms apartment building came forward. Mr. Tomby lived at the Fordham. He told the lieutenant in charge. He did a lot of dangerous reporting and used to joke about being knocked off someday. When I heard about his death, I reviewed the tape from the security camera in his hallway. Look, a fuzzy image popped up, showing a red-haired, bearded man leaving the Tomby apartment and closed the door. As he walked towards the camera, he lifted his hand to his face and adjusted his ring. That's from this morning's tape. Marcus lives alone, and that isn't him. The lieutenant immediately contacted the FBI, maybe? I don't know. The Times. Yes, Marcus was on Astoria, explained the editor. He's suspected Metro catering. He suspected Metro carting of illegal dumping toxic. He suspected Metro carting of illegally dumping toxic waste. He said he had an inside contact and was preparing a dynamite expose. Armed with the blurry blow-up from the security camera, the police visited Metro carting. Why, that's Al Culier. That's Al Culier. A secretary blurted out. He started working for us last month. The lieutenant asked if Al had any reporter friends. He never mentioned any. Did he come to work today? No, he never shows up. When the police telephoned Al Culier's number, they found it was the same as that of a midtown bar. His address corresponded to a vacant lot. Put on an APB, the lieutenant barked. He checked his watch. It had been less than 8 hours since the reporter's death. Get over to Tomby's apartment. Dust the place for prints. 2 hours later, there was more bad news. All the prints, both in the apartment and on the door, belonged to the deceased. As for the mysterious suspect, Al, he had vanished completely. The lieutenant mulled over the evidence. I think I know what happened, he drawled with a smile. What happened and what clue pointed the lieutenant to the truth? We need page 346 for this one. Page 346. The videotape showed Al Culier closing the apartment door and adjusting his ring. Clearly, he wasn't wearing gloves, and yet the only prints found on the door belonged to the deceased. The explanation was simple enough. Marcus Tomby and Al Culier were the same person, and he died of natural causes. The discovery of the red wig and beard in Tomby's office confirmed this. Marcus had gone undercover at Metro Carting, disguised himself as a new employee, Al Culier, in order to get his expose. And I forgot to put that back in, but that's okay. That has been a reading from the Little Giant Book of Whodunits. And So yeah, this is a book by Conrad and illustrated by Matt LaFleur. Now, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way at all that information is in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.